The grand throne room of Eldoria Castle fell silent as King Alexander's footsteps echoed against the marble floors. His usual composed demeanor had cracked, revealing the storm brewing beneath the surface. The morning had started like any other, with the soft chiming of the palace bells and the rustle of servants preparing for another day of royal duties. But now, as afternoon shadows stretched across the ornate tapestries, everything had changed. Queen Isabella stood near the towering windows, her emerald gown catching the fading sunlight. Her lips curved in what some might call a smile, but those who knew her well recognized it as something far more calculating. She held a delicate porcelain teacup, steam rising from the amber liquid within, as if this were merely another pleasant afternoon tea rather than the moment that would reshape their kingdom forever. Princess Catherine sat in the corner of the room, her usually pristine composure shattered. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clutched a crumpled letter in her trembling hands. The royal blue of her dress seemed to darken with each sob that escaped her lips. She had always been the people's favorite, the princess who brought light to every room she entered. But today, that light had been extinguished by revelations that cut deeper than any sword. The story had begun 3 weeks earlier, when whispers first started circulating through the castle corridors. Palace staff noticed strange meetings happening in the dead of night, hushed conversations that ended abruptly when others approached, and documents being shuffled between hands like secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. The Kingdom of Eldoria had enjoyed peace for nearly 2 decades under King Alexander's rule, but peace, as history had taught them, was often more fragile than it appeared. Lord Chancellor Marcus had been the first to bring concrete evidence to the king's attention. He was a man of 60 years, with silver hair and eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of 3 monarchs. His loyalty to the crown was unquestionable, which made his reluctance to share what he had discovered all the more troubling. When he finally requested a private audience with King Alexander, his hands shook as he presented documents that would unravel everything the royal family thought they knew about their closest allies. The evidence was damning. Secret correspondence between Queen Isabella and foreign dignitaries revealed plans that went far beyond mere diplomatic relations. Trade agreements that would benefit Isabella's family at the expense of Eldoria's people, military intelligence shared with neighboring kingdoms, and, most shocking of all, discussions about the succession that painted Princess Catherine not as the beloved heir, but as an obstacle to be removed. King Alexander had read the letters 3 times before the full weight of their implications settled in his mind. His wife of 15 years, the woman who had stood beside him through wars and celebrations, who had borne him children and shared his dreams of a prosperous kingdom, had been systematically betraying everything he held dear. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could have, striking at the very foundation of his identity as both a king and a husband. What made the situation even more complex was the timing. Princess Catherine had just announced her engagement to Prince William of the neighboring Kingdom of Astoria, a union that was meant to strengthen both realms and ensure peace for generations to come. The wedding was planned for the spring, and preparations had already begun. Noble families from across the continent were preparing to attend what was being called the wedding of the century. Now, with Isabella's schemes exposed, even this joyous occasion was tainted by questions of political manipulation and hidden agendas. The confrontation had been inevitable, but King Alexander had hoped to handle it privately, away from the prying eyes of the court. However, Queen Isabella seemed to have anticipated his discovery. She had positioned herself strategically, ensuring that any accusation he made would be witnessed by key members of the nobility. It was a calculated move that spoke to her political acumen, even as it revealed the depths of her deception. Princess Catherine had stumbled into the middle of this brewing storm quite by accident. She had come to the throne room seeking her father's blessing for the final wedding preparations, her heart light with the anticipation of her upcoming marriage. Instead, she found herself confronted with evidence that her stepmother, the woman who had raised her since she was 7 years old, viewed her not as a daughter, but as a political inconvenience. The letter Catherine clutched contained the most personal and hurtful revelations of all. In Isabella's own handwriting were plans to discredit the princess, to create scandals that would make her unfit for marriage to Prince William, and ultimately to position Isabella's own son, Prince Edmund, as the primary heir to Eldoria's throne. Edmund was Alexander's son from his marriage to Isabella, but he was only 12 years old and had never shown interest in ruling. Yet Isabella's ambitions for him were boundless. As the three central figures of this drama stood in the throne room, each lost in their own thoughts and emotions, the weight of history seemed to press down upon them. The castle itself appeared to hold its breath, as if the very stones understood that what happened next would determine not just the fate of this royal family, but the future of an entire kingdom. King Alexander's anger was a slow-burning fire that had been building for weeks. Unlike the explosive rage that might consume a lesser man, his fury was controlled, methodical, and all the more terrifying for its restraint. He had spent sleepless nights poring over the evidence, consulting with trusted advisors, and trying to find some explanation that might preserve both his marriage and his kingdom. But there was none to be found. Queen Isabella's confidence, meanwhile, seemed unshakable. She had orchestrated her plans with the precision of a master chess player, always thinking several moves ahead. Even now, faced with exposure, she appeared to believe that she could navigate her way out of this crisis. Her smile suggested that she had yet more cards to play, secrets that might turn the tables once again in her favor. Princess Catherine represented the heart of the kingdom in this moment. Her tears were not just for her own betrayal, but for the realization that everything she had believed about her family, her future, and her place in the world had been built on foundations of sand. The wedding dress that hung in her chambers, the dreams of a peaceful future with Prince William, the trust she had placed in the woman she called mother, all of it now seemed like elaborate illusions designed to serve someone else's ambitions. The silence stretched on, thick with unspoken accusations and barely contained emotions. Outside the throne room, life in the castle continued its normal rhythm. Servants prepared the evening meal, guards changed shifts at their posts, and courtiers engaged in their usual gossip and political maneuvering. But inside this room, time seemed suspended, as if the very air was waiting for someone to speak the words that would change everything. King Alexander finally broke the silence, his voice low and measured. The words he spoke would set in motion events that none of them could fully predict, beginning a chain of consequences that would ripple through their lives and their kingdom for years to come. This was not just a family crisis. It was a political earthquake that would test every alliance, challenge every assumption, and ultimately determine whether Eldoria would emerge stronger or be torn apart by the ambitions of those closest to its throne. The afternoon light continued to fade through the great windows, casting longer shadows across the room. Soon, the servants would come to light the evening candles, and the business of the kingdom would resume. But first, this reckoning had to run its course. The three figures in the throne room were about to embark on a journey that would test their relationships, their principles, and their very understanding of power, love, and loyalty in ways they had never imagined possible. Hashtag the Royal Court Drama. Part 2. The words that King Alexander finally spoke cut through the heavy silence like a blade through silk. "Isabella," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 15 years of marriage and betrayal. "We need to discuss your correspondence with Duke Ravencrest of Northmoor." The name hung in the air like a curse, and for the first time since entering the throne room, Queen Isabella's confident smile faltered. Duke Ravencrest was known throughout the realm as a man of questionable loyalties, someone who had switched sides during the War of the Three Crowns and had profited handsomely from each betrayal. That Isabella had been in communication with him was damning enough, but the content of their letters revealed a conspiracy that threatened the very stability of Eldoria. The Duke had promised Isabella military support for her son's claim to the throne, support that would come at the cost of Eldoria's independence. Princess Catherine looked up from her tear-stained letter, confusion mixing with her grief. "Duke Ravencrest? But, father, didn't you banish him from the kingdom after the war?" Her voice was small, almost childlike, as she struggled to understand how the woman who had tucked her into bed for years could have been plotting against everything their family stood for. King Alexander's jaw tightened. "Indeed I did, Catherine," which makes these communications an act of treason. He pulled out a leather portfolio from his desk, its contents representing months of investigation by his most trusted spies. "Isabella has been feeding him information about our military positions, our trade routes, and our diplomatic relationships with neighboring kingdoms. She's been preparing the groundwork for an invasion." The accusation struck Isabella like a physical blow, but she recovered quickly, her political instincts taking over. "Alexander, surely you don't believe the word of common spies over your own wife? These documents could be forgeries created by our enemies to sow discord within our family." Her voice carried the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to talking her way out of difficult situations. But King Alexander was not so easily swayed. He opened the portfolio and withdrew a letter written in Isabella's distinctive handwriting, the same elegant script that had once penned love letters during their courtship. "This is your hand, Isabella, your seal, your signature. Are you suggesting that someone has been forging your correspondence for months without your knowledge?" The evidence was overwhelming, but Isabella's mind raced through possible explanations and escape routes. She had not survived the treacherous world of court politics by surrendering at the first sign of trouble. "Those letters," she said carefully, "were part of a larger strategy to deceive Duke Ravencrest. I've been feeding him false information to protect Eldoria, not harm it." Princess Catherine stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the marble floor. "Stop lying," she cried, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "I've read the letter about me, about how I'm an obstacle to Edmund's rightful place on the throne. How is destroying my reputation part of protecting the kingdom?" The letter Catherine referred to was perhaps the most damaging piece of evidence against Isabella. Written just 2 weeks earlier, it outlined a detailed plan to create a scandal involving Princess Catherine and a young nobleman, Lord Garrett of Willowmere. The plan was designed to make Catherine appear unfaithful and unworthy of marriage to Prince William, thereby breaking the crucial alliance with Astoria and clearing the path for Edmund's eventual ascension to the throne. Lord Garrett was an innocent pawn in this scheme, a young man who had shown Catherine nothing but respectful friendship. The plan involved forging compromising letters between them and arranging for these forgeries to be discovered at a carefully orchestrated moment. The resulting scandal would not only destroy Catherine's reputation, but would also provide Isabella with justification to send her away from court, perhaps to a remote convent where she could never challenge Edmund's claim. Isabella's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. "Catherine, you misunderstood that letter. I was exploring potential threats to your safety, ways our enemies might try to harm you. I needed to understand their tactics to protect you from them." King Alexander slammed his hand on the desk, causing the inkwells to rattle. "Enough, Isabella. Do you take us for fools? This letter contains specific instructions to your spy network, detailed timelines, and even suggestions for which scandal sheets will be most effective at spreading the false story. This isn't protection. This is character assassination." The revelation of Isabella's spy network had been one of the most shocking discoveries in the investigation. For years, she had been building a web of informants throughout the kingdom, from kitchen maids to minor nobles, all reporting back to her about the movements and conversations of potential rivals. She had used this network to eliminate threats to her position, to gather blackmail material on her enemies, and to position herself as indispensable to the king's rule. Princess Catherine sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the deception. "How long?" she whispered. "How long have you been planning this?" Isabella's composure finally began to crack under the weight of the evidence and the emotions of those she had betrayed. "Catherine, you must understand," she began, her voice taking on a pleading tone for the first time. "Edmund is my son. A mother's first duty is to secure her child's future. Everything I did was to ensure he would have the position he deserves." The admission hit King Alexander like a physical blow. the position he deserves? Catherine is my eldest child and legitimate heir. Edmund is 12 years old and has never expressed any interest in ruling. You would destroy an innocent girl's life for an ambition she never asked for. The tragedy of the situation was that Edmund himself was completely unaware of his mother's schemes. He was a gentle boy who preferred books to swords, who spent his days studying astronomy and writing poetry. He adored his half-sister Catherine and had never shown any signs of jealousy or ambition regarding the throne. Isabella's plans were entirely her own creation, born from her own hunger for power and her determination to see her bloodline continue the royal dynasty. Queen Isabella straightened her shoulders, her brief moment of vulnerability passing. You speak of legitimacy, Alexander, but you forget that circumstances change. Catherine may be your daughter, but she's also naive, emotional, and easily manipulated. Look at her now, crying over a few letters like a child. Is this the kind of ruler Eldoria needs? The cruelty of the comment struck Catherine like a slap. Here was the woman who had comforted her through nightmares, who had taught her to dance and to conduct herself with royal dignity, now using her tears as evidence of weakness. It was a masterclass in manipulation, attempting to turn Catherine's natural human emotions into disqualification for leadership. King Alexander's anger reached a new level at this attack on his daughter. Catherine's capacity for emotion is not a weakness, Isabella. It's what makes her capable of truly caring about our people. You speak of her being easily manipulated, but the only person who has been manipulating her is you. The irony was not lost on any of them that this confrontation was taking place in the very throne room where Catherine had been officially named heir to the kingdom on her 18th birthday. The ceremony had been a moment of great joy, with nobles from across the realm pledging their loyalty to the future queen. Isabella had stood beside Alexander that day, smiling proudly as Catherine accepted the ceremonial sword of succession. Even then, it seemed, she had been plotting to undo everything that ceremony represented. As the afternoon wore on, more details of Isabella's conspiracy emerged. She had been in contact not only with Duke Ravencrest, but also with several other disgruntled nobles who felt they had been overlooked for positions of power during Alexander's reign. She had promised them rewards and positions in exchange for their support of Edmund's eventual claim to the throne. The conspiracy reached into every level of the kingdom's government, threatening to tear apart the carefully constructed alliances that had maintained peace for 2 decades. Perhaps most disturbing of all was the revelation that Isabella had been slowly poisoning Alexander's relationship with his advisors, planting seeds of doubt about their loyalty and competence. Several trusted counselors had been dismissed over the past year based on Isabella's subtle suggestions about their reliability. She had been systematically isolating the king from his support network, making him increasingly dependent on her advice and perspective. The realization of how thoroughly he had been deceived left King Alexander questioning everything he thought he knew about his reign and his relationships. How many decisions have been influenced by Isabella's manipulation? How many good and loyal servants have been cast aside because of her whispered doubts? The betrayal was not just personal, but professional, undermining his very ability to govern effectively. Princess Catherine found her voice again, though it shook with emotion. What about Prince William? Does he know about any of this? Our wedding is supposed to strengthen the alliance between our kingdoms, but if this conspiracy becomes public, it will destroy everything we've worked for. The question of Prince William and the impending royal wedding added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. William was not just Catherine's fiancé, but also a crucial diplomatic ally. His kingdom of Astoria controlled important trade routes and had been a bulwark against invasion for the Eastern Territories. The marriage alliance was meant to formalize and strengthen this relationship, ensuring peace and prosperity for both realms. Isabella's plot to destroy Catherine's reputation would have effectively ended this alliance, leaving Eldoria isolated and vulnerable. It was a price Isabella seemed willing to pay for her son's advancement, but one that would have cost thousands of innocent lives if war had resulted from the diplomatic breakdown. As the three of them stood in the throne room, surrounded by the portraits of Alexander's ancestors, the weight of history pressed down upon them. Every king and queen depicted in those paintings had faced their own crises, their own moments when the survival of the kingdom hung in the balance. But few had faced betrayal from within their own family, from someone who had shared their bed and their dreams for the future. The sun had nearly set now, casting the throne room in deep shadows. Soon they would need to light the evening candles and make decisions about how to proceed. The evidence of Isabella's treachery was overwhelming, but she was still the queen, still the mother of one of Alexander's children, still a woman he had once loved more than life itself. The personal and political implications of what happened next would reverberate through the kingdom for generations to come. Hashtag the royal court drama. Part 3. The evening candles had been lit throughout the castle, casting dancing shadows on the walls as servants moved quietly through the corridors. Word of the confrontation in the throne room had not yet spread, but an air of tension permeated the royal quarters. In the king's private study, Alexander sat alone, staring at the evidence of his wife's betrayal spread across his mahogany desk. The weight of 15 years of marriage pressed down upon him like a stone, each memory now tainted by the knowledge of Isabella's deception. Meanwhile, in her chambers, Queen Isabella paced before the fireplace, her emerald gown rustling with each step. Her confident mask had finally slipped away completely, revealing the calculating mind beneath. She knew that her carefully constructed plans were unraveling, but she was far from defeated. Isabella had not climbed from minor nobility to become queen by surrendering at the first sign of trouble. Her mind raced through possibilities, contingencies, and escape routes she had prepared for exactly this situation. Princess Catherine had retreated to her own rooms, where her loyal maid, Sarah, attempted to comfort her with warm tea and gentle words. But comfort seemed impossible when everything Catherine had believed about her family had been shattered in a single afternoon. The wedding dress hanging in her wardrobe, a magnificent creation of silk and pearls that had taken months to complete, now seemed to mock her with its promise of happiness and stability. The knock on Isabella's chamber door came just after midnight. She had been expecting it, though she wondered who Alexander would send. To her surprise, it was Lord Chancellor Marcus himself, accompanied by two of the king's most trusted guards. The old man's face bore the weight of his years and the burden of what he had uncovered. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice formal and distant despite the years they had known each other. "By order of King Alexander, I must inform you that you are confined to your quarters while a full investigation is conducted into allegations of treason against the crown." Isabella's laugh was sharp and bitter. Treason? Is that what Alexander calls a wife's concern for her son's future? But even as she spoke, she was calculating her options. The guards at her door would make escape impossible, at least through conventional means. However, Isabella had spent years building networks and preparing for contingencies that others couldn't imagine. In the castle's lower levels, in chambers that few knew existed, Isabella's most loyal servants were already implementing plans that had been years in the making. Secret passages built during the castle's construction centuries earlier provided routes that bypassed the normal corridors and guard posts. Caches of gold and precious gems, accumulated over years of careful skimming from the royal treasury, were being moved to predetermined locations outside the kingdom's borders. Prince Edmund slept peacefully in his chambers, unaware that his life was about to change forever. At 12 years old, he understood politics only in the abstract, as something adults discussed in hushed tones. He knew his mother wanted great things for him, but he had never asked for the burden of kingship. His dreams were filled with adventures from the books he loved, not the complex realities of ruling a kingdom. King Alexander found no peace in sleep that night. He wandered the castle's halls, visiting places that held memories of happier times with Isabella. The garden where they had walked during their courtship, the balcony where she had stood in her wedding dress 15 years ago, the nursery where they had planned to raise their children together. Each location now felt like a monument to his own naivety. Dawn brought new revelations as Marcus's investigators continued their work. They had uncovered evidence of financial irregularities that went back years. Isabella had been systematically transferring funds from the royal treasury to accounts controlled by her family and allies. The amounts were significant enough to fund a small army, which, investigators realized with growing alarm, was exactly what they had been intended to do. More disturbing still were the documents found hidden in Isabella's private study. Letters from foreign merchants offering to purchase maps of Eldoria's defenses, correspondence with assassins from neighboring kingdoms, and, most chilling of all, contracts for the kidnapping of Princess Catherine. The plan had been to make Catherine's disappearance appear to be the work of bandits, clearing the path for Edmund's succession while avoiding the political complications that would arise from an obvious murder. Princess Catherine was summoned to her father's study that morning to review these new findings. She entered the room with red-rimmed eyes and a pale complexion, clearly having slept little. The sight of her father, looking older than she had ever seen him, brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Father," she said quietly, "I don't understand how someone could plan such things. The woman I thought was my mother was actually planning to have me killed." Alexander's voice was heavy with grief and anger. "It appears so, my dear. The evidence is overwhelming." He gestured to the documents spread across his desk. Isabella's ambition knows no bounds. She was willing to destroy not just our family, but our entire kingdom to see Edmund on the throne. The irony was devastating. Edmund himself was a gentle soul who had never shown any desire for power or glory. He spent his days reading poetry and studying the stars, dreaming of becoming a scholar rather than a ruler. Isabella's grand plans for his future were entirely her own creation, projected onto a boy who would have been perfectly content to remain a minor prince for his entire life. As morning progressed, reports arrived from the kingdom's borders. Duke Ravencrest had been spotted near the eastern frontier with a considerable force of mercenaries. It seemed that Isabella's communications with him had included specific dates and plans for his invasion. With the Queen's arrest, those plans were now in jeopardy, but Ravencrest appeared to be proceeding anyway, hoping to capitalize on the royal family's internal strife. King Alexander called an emergency council meeting, summoning his most trusted advisors to discuss both the immediate threat from Ravencrest and the longer-term implications of Isabella's treason. The assembled nobles listened in stunned silence as Marcus read aloud selected portions of the intercepted correspondence. Many of them had children Catherine's age and struggled to comprehend how a mother could plan such cruelty against a stepchild. Sir William de Grey, the kingdom's marshal, was the first to speak after the reading concluded. "Your Majesty, we must mobilize our forces immediately. If Ravencrest is moving against us, we need to respond swiftly and decisively." His practical military mind cut through the emotional turmoil to focus on the immediate tactical situation. But Lady Eleanor Fairfax, one of Catherine's closest friends and advisors, raised a more complex concern. What about Princess Catherine's wedding? The entire diplomatic foundation of our alliance with Astoria is built around this marriage. If we postpone or cancel it now, Prince William's father might interpret it as a sign of weakness or instability. The wedding had been planned for just 6 weeks away. Invitations had been sent to nobility across the continent. Preparations were in their final stages, and the political implications of the alliance were crucial to Eldoria's long-term security. Yet how could they proceed with a celebration when the royal family was in such turmoil? Princess Catherine, who had been sitting quietly in the corner of the council chamber, finally spoke. "I want the wedding to proceed as planned." Her voice was stronger than it had been the previous day, though still marked by the strain of recent events. "Isabella may have tried to destroy my future, but I won't let her succeed. Our kingdom needs this alliance, and I won't let her treachery deny our people the peace and prosperity it will bring." Her words carried a steel that surprised even her father. In the space of 24 hours, Catherine had been forced to grow from a sheltered princess into a woman capable of making difficult political decisions under pressure. The transformation was remarkable and spoke to the strength of character that Isabella had so underestimated. King Alexander looked at his daughter with new respect. "Are you certain, Catherine? The emotional toll of proceeding with the wedding while all this is happening." "I'm certain, father. Prince William and I care for each other deeply, and our marriage represents hope for thousands of people in both our kingdoms. I won't let one woman's ambition destroy that hope." The decision to proceed with the wedding created new challenges. How could they maintain the appearance of royal stability while dealing with a treasonous queen and an impending invasion? The castle would need to accommodate hundreds of foreign guests while simultaneously preparing for potential military action. It was a logistical nightmare that would test every aspect of the kingdom's organization and resolve. Meanwhile, in her confined chambers, Isabella was not idle. Through coded messages passed by seemingly innocent servants, she had managed to maintain contact with her conspirators outside the castle. The plan was evolving, becoming more desperate, but potentially more devastating. If she could not achieve her goals through subtlety and manipulation, she was prepared to resort to more direct and violent methods. The revelation that Isabella had been in contact with foreign assassins suggested that her plans extended beyond simple political maneuvering. She had been preparing for the possibility of using force to achieve her objectives, and the presence of Ravencrest's army near the border indicated that those preparations were more advanced than anyone had realized. As evening approached, King Alexander made one of the most difficult decisions of his reign. Isabella would be formally charged with high treason and conspiracy against the crown. The trial would be conducted according to ancient laws that few had hoped would ever be needed again. The penalty for treason was death, and while Alexander struggled with the personal implications of that sentence, his duty as king demanded that justice be served. The announcement of the queen's arrest sent shockwaves through the castle and beyond. Servants whispered in corners. Nobles sent urgent messages to their own estates, and word spread quickly to neighboring kingdoms. The stability that Eldoria had enjoyed for 2 decades suddenly seemed as fragile as morning frost. Prince Edmund was finally told the truth about his mother's actions in terms appropriate for his young age. The boy was devastated, not by the loss of potential power he had never wanted, but by the realization that his mother had been willing to hurt people he loved. His relationship with Catherine had always been warm and affectionate, and the knowledge that Isabella had plotted against her broke his heart. "Will Catherine still want to be my sister?" he asked his father through tears that night. "When she's queen, will she send me away because of what mother did?" Alexander's heart broke for his son, innocent of any wrongdoing but forever marked by his mother's crimes. "Catherine loves you, Edmund. Nothing your mother did changes that. You are not responsible for her choices." The conversation highlighted one of the most tragic aspects of the entire situation. Isabella's actions had not only betrayed her husband and threatened her stepdaughter, but had also potentially destroyed her own son's future happiness and security. In pursuing power for Edmund, she had created a situation where his very presence at court might serve as a constant reminder of her treachery. As night fell over Eldoria Castle, the kingdom stood at a crossroads. The next few days would determine not only the fate of the royal family, but the future of the realm itself. With enemies gathering at the borders and allies questioning the stability of the crown, every decision made in the coming hours would echo through history. The young princess who had awakened that morning as a sheltered royal bride-to-be was now being tested in ways that would forge her into the leader her kingdom desperately needed. Hashtag the royal court drama. Part 4. 3 weeks had passed since Queen Isabella's arrest, and Eldoria Castle bustled with preparations for what many called the most important royal wedding in a generation. Despite the turmoil surrounding the royal family, Princess Catherine had insisted that her marriage to Prince William proceed as scheduled. The decision had proven wise, as the approaching celebration provided a focal point for national unity during a time of unprecedented crisis. The morning of the trial dawned gray and cold, with storm clouds gathering over the kingdom like an omen. Isabella sat in the ancient court of justice, a chamber that had not been used for such serious proceedings in over 50 years. The carved stone walls seemed to bear witness to centuries of royal justice, their silent presence lending gravity to the proceedings that would determine the fate of a queen. King Alexander entered the courtroom wearing the crown of justice, a simple circlet of gold reserved for the most solemn royal duties. The weight of it felt heavier than any crown he had ever worn, not because of its physical mass, but because of what it represented. Today, he was not acting as a husband or father, but as the ultimate arbiter of justice in his realm. Isabella had refused legal counsel, claiming that she would represent herself against what she termed trumped-up charges based on jealousy and political maneuvering. Her confidence seemed unshaken even as the evidence mounted against her. She sat straight-backed in the prisoner's dock, her royal bearing intact despite the simple gray dress that had replaced her usual finery. Lord Chancellor Marcus served as prosecutor, a role that clearly pained him. He had known Isabella for 15 years, had witnessed her wedding to the king, and had watched her navigate the complexities of court life with skill and grace. Now he stood before her with evidence of betrayals that struck at the very heart of the kingdom's security. "Your Majesty," Marcus began, his voice formal and measured, "the evidence before this court demonstrates a pattern of treachery spanning several years. You stand accused of correspondence with known enemies of the realm, conspiracy to commit murder, theft from the royal treasury, and high treason against the crown." Isabella's response was swift and cutting. "I stand accused by men who fear a woman's influence and intelligence. Every action I took was in the best interests of this kingdom, even when those actions were misunderstood or misrepresented by those with their own political agendas." The trial proceeded methodically, with Marcus presenting letter after letter, document after document, building an overwhelming case against the queen. Each piece of evidence was carefully authenticated and explained, creating a narrative of ambition and betrayal that shocked even the experienced nobles who served as judges. Perhaps the most damaging testimony came from Sir James Blackwood, one of Isabella's former allies who had been captured attempting to flee the kingdom. In exchange for clemency, he had agreed to testify about the full scope of the conspiracy. His revelations painted a picture of a network that extended far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. "The Queen promised me control of the eastern provinces once Prince Edmund took the throne," Blackwood testified, his voice barely above a whisper. "She said that Princess Catherine was weak and unsuited for rule, that the kingdom needed strong leaders who understood the realities of power. She convinced many of us that we were serving Eldoria's best interests." Isabella's reaction to this testimony was the first crack in her composed facade. Her face flushed with anger as she rose from her seat. "You speak of serving the kingdom's interests while betraying the woman who offered you advancement beyond your modest abilities. Your word is worthless, bought with promises of mercy from a king who fears what I represented." King Alexander's jaw tightened at her words, but he maintained his judicial composure. The crown he wore demanded impartiality, even when his heart was breaking with each revelation of his wife's deceptions. The most emotional moment of the trial came when Princess Catherine took the stand to describe the impact of Isabella's plotting on her own life and future. She spoke quietly, but clearly about the terror she had felt upon learning that the woman she considered a mother had planned her kidnapping and possible murder. "I trusted her completely," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "When I was afraid, she comforted me. When I was uncertain about royal duties, she guided me. To learn that she saw me not as a daughter, but as an obstacle to be removed, it has changed how I see everything about my childhood and my family." Isabella's defense was as calculated as everything else she had done. She portrayed herself as a misunderstood protector of the realm, someone who had recognized threats that others had missed. She claimed that her correspondence with Duke Ravencrest was part of an elaborate deception designed to gather intelligence about his plans, and that her financial dealings were necessary preparations for the kingdom's defense. "You speak of treason," Isabella declared during her final statement. "But I have spent 15 years serving this kingdom faithfully. Every decision I made was guided by my understanding of what Eldoria needed to survive in a dangerous world. If protecting my son's birthright and ensuring strong leadership for our people constitutes treason, then I am guilty as charged." Her words might have been persuasive if not for the overwhelming documentary evidence against her. The letters in her own handwriting, sealed with her personal seal, left no room for doubt about her intentions. The judges deliberated for less than an hour before returning with their verdict. "Guilty on all charges," announced Lord Chief Justice Aldrich, his ancient voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. "The sentence, as prescribed by law for high treason, is death." The words hung in the air like a death knell. Isabella received the sentence without flinching, as if she had expected no other outcome. King Alexander felt something die inside him as he realized that the woman he had loved was truly gone, replaced by someone whose ambition had consumed everything noble about her character. However, as sovereign, Alexander had the power to commute the sentence, and, after much agonizing consideration, he chose mercy over justice. "The sentence is commuted to life imprisonment in the Tower of Sorrows, with all royal titles and privileges permanently revoked," he announced. "You will be known henceforth simply as Isabella of Westmarch, and you will remain confined until your natural death." The Tower of Sorrows was a fortress on a remote island off Eldoria's coast, reserved for the most dangerous political prisoners. It was escape-proof, isolated from the mainland by treacherous waters, but it allowed Isabella to live out her days with a degree of dignity that many felt she did not deserve. Meanwhile, the threat from Duke Ravencrest had materialized into open conflict. His mercenary army had crossed the eastern border and was advancing toward the capital. The timing was clearly coordinated with Isabella's plans, intended to exploit the chaos her arrest would create. However, Ravencrest had underestimated the resilience of Eldoria's people and the loyalty they felt toward their king. Sir William de Grey had mobilized the kingdom's forces with impressive speed. The royal army, bolstered by loyal nobles who brought their own men at arms, marched to meet Ravencrest's mercenaries in the field. The battle that followed would determine not just the outcome of this immediate crisis, but the future stability of the realm. Princess Catherine insisted on remaining at court during the military campaign, despite suggestions that she retreat to a safer location. "This is my kingdom too," she declared. "I will not hide in some distant castle while others fight for our freedom." Her courage during this period earned her enormous respect from the nobility and common people alike. Prince William of Astoria arrived earlier than planned, bringing with him a contingent of knights as a wedding gift to his bride. Their presence significantly strengthened Eldoria's military position and demonstrated the diplomatic value of the upcoming marriage alliance. William's immediate offer of military assistance also proved his genuine commitment to Catherine and their future together. The young prince was shocked by the revelations about Isabella's conspiracy, but his reaction further endeared him to Catherine and her father. "Your Majesty," he told King Alexander, "this crisis has revealed the true strength of your family and your kingdom. I am honored to be joining such a noble house." The battle against Ravencrest forces took place at Meadowbrook Plain, a strategic location that controlled access to the kingdom's heartland. The fighting was fierce, but relatively brief, as Ravencrest's mercenaries lacked the motivation and loyalty of Eldoria's defenders. When the Duke himself fell in single combat against Sir William de Grey, his army scattered like leaves in the wind. News of the victory reached the capital just 2 days before the wedding, creating an atmosphere of celebration that seemed to wash away the darkness of recent weeks. The people saw Catherine's upcoming marriage not just as a royal celebration, but as a symbol of their kingdom's resilience and bright future. The wedding day itself dawned bright and clear, as if the weather was celebrating along with the kingdom. Princess Catherine walked down the aisle of the great cathedral in a dress that seemed to capture and reflect every ray of sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. The presence of nobility from across the continent demonstrated that Eldoria's reputation had survived the recent crisis. Prince Edmund served as a page in the ceremony, his young face glowing with happiness for his beloved sister. The sight of him walking proudly beside Catherine sent a powerful message about the royal family's unity and strength. Whatever Isabella had intended, she had failed to destroy the love between her son and stepdaughter. King Alexander performed the ceremony himself, his voice strong and clear as he pronounced Catherine and William husband and wife. The moment represented not just a union between two young people in love, but a triumph of hope over despair, of loyalty over treachery, of the future over the bitter legacy of the past. As the newlyweds emerged from the cathedral to the cheers of thousands of their subjects, the kingdom seemed reborn. The conspiracy that had threatened to tear Eldoria apart had instead revealed the strength of its foundations. The royal family, tested by betrayal and crisis, had emerged stronger and more united than ever. In a tower of sorrows, Isabella watched the celebration from her window, a small dot of light visible across the distant water. Her grand plans had crumbled to dust, leaving her with nothing but regrets and the knowledge that her ambition had cost her everything she had once held dear. The woman who had once dreamed of being the power behind the throne was now just another forgotten prisoner, watching life continue without her. The wedding feast lasted well into the night, with music and dancing that celebrated not just a royal marriage but the survival of a kingdom. Princess Catherine, now Queen Catherine of Astoria and heir to Eldoria's throne, danced with her new husband as her subjects looked on with joy and pride. The young woman who had been nearly destroyed by treachery had become a symbol of hope and strength. As the celebration continued around them, King Alexander stood on the castle balcony with Prince Edmund at his side. The boy had grown up considerably during the recent crisis, but his essential gentle nature remained unchanged. "Will Mother ever come home?" Edmund asked quietly, his young voice carrying a sadness that no child should have to bear. Alexander placed a protective hand on his son's shoulder. "I don't know, Edmund, but I do know that you have a family here who loves you and a future full of possibilities. Your mother's choices don't define who you are or who you can become." The kingdom of Eldoria had faced its greatest internal crisis in generations and emerged victorious. The conspiracy that might have destroyed it had instead revealed the true character of its leaders and people. As the stars wheeled overhead and the celebration continued below, the future stretched out before them bright with promise and possibility. The reign of King Alexander would be remembered not for the betrayal he endured, but for the wisdom and mercy he showed in overcoming it.